In June 84, Noreen was contacted by a local man who claimed to have valuable information on Johnny's case. According to Noreen's sworn 1999 testimony and 2000 book, this was Des Moines PI Sam Soda calling her to arrange a meeting. They met at Soda's office June 13th, 1984. Noreen brought a tape recorder, switched it on, and listened as Soda revealed that there would be a second kidnapping taking place in Des Moines. Soda specified that it would occur on the south side of Des Moines. The victim would be another paperboy, and it would take place on the second weekend in August. He credited the information to an informant. Noreen thanked him for the information, but was puzzled why he didn't go to the police. Why is he telling her, of all people? I mean, what? This doesn't make any sense. So she has a tape recording of this. And this is Sam Soda, a local PI. Does this make any sense to anybody? So, regarding Sam Soda's involvement here, apparently he did blow the whistle on Frank Sikora, a sexual predator who worked at the paper. So this is an article, October 19th, 1984, UPI archives. A former newspaper employee who confessed to having sexual contact with at least 7 of the young carriers he supervised at Iowa's largest newspaper pled innocent today to sexual abuse charges. Frank Sikora, 37, of Des Moines, turned himself into authorities 7 a.m. and pled innocent to 1 charge of third-degree sexual abuse and 1 count of lewd and lascivious acts with a child. Polk County Associate District Judge Norman Elliott set the bond to $5,000 each count. Sikora was fired from his job in the Des Moines Register Circulation Department Monday when a PI released a videotape confession in which Sikora discusses his relationship with at least 7 paperboys. However, Haviland said officials do not rely solely on the 2-hour tape made by investigator Sam Soda. He said Thursday's charges were based on information gathered during a police investigation. Police have said a polygraph test earlier this week showed Sikora had no involvement in the disappearance of Register newspaper carriers Johnny Gosch and Eugene Martin. Gosch vanished September 5th, 82, while delivering newspapers. Martin disappeared from his paper route August 12th. On the videotape, Sikora confessed to sleeping with 7 young newspaper carriers who worked as runners on his routes. He said he fondled almost all the boys, Soda said. Soda suggested Sikora may have some information about the missing boys. This is a man who is in a position where he knows all the routes and all the carriers, said Soda. Spokesman of the anti-child pornography group called Stolen Children are reported every day. Okay, other people say Soda is not a trustworthy source. However, if he did this investigation into Sikora and possibly others at the newspaper, I mean, this is crazy. This is crazy. So this newspaper employee is abusing these children. And there could be and these newspaper boys happen to be going missing. I mean, is this all not coincidence? What's going on here? This is not a coincidence? Really? I mean, what is going on? And then Sam Soda is now knows the exact date of when someone else is going missing, but he doesn't tell the police, or maybe he does, or maybe does he know the police are compromised? By Noreen's account, she then unsuccessfully tried to convince law enforcement and the media to heed the warning about a second kidnapping. Only Des Moines Register reporter Frank Santiago was willing to listen to the tape. So nobody else even wanted to listen to the tape? They just don't care. This is just so insane. Sometime around August 84, Noreen was invited to testify in Washington, D.C. at Senator Arlen Specter's hearing on pedophile rings. Her book, written in 2000, called the hearings Organized Crime and Its Relationship to Kidnapping, or The Organized Crime Hearings and Its Relationship to Missing Children, but the published title was The Effect of Pornography on Women and Children. Paul Bishop accompanied her to the testimony, which took place August 8th, 1984. And there is a sketch here of the man seen talking to Eugene Martin just before his disappearance. And in September 1984, a federal grand jury in Des Moines subpoenaed Paul Bishop to testify about the Gosch and Martin cases. What? Why? The CIA. Why is the CIA asset involved in these cases? During the month of October, Sam Soda exposed a pedophile named Frank Sikora who worked for the Des Moines Register. I went over that article. In June 1985, a dollar bill surfaced in Sioux City, Iowa, with the message, "I am alive, Johnny Gosch," written on it. 3 handwriting experts confirmed the message as having been written by Johnny Gosch. I mean, how old was it, though? Because this is a dollar bill. Like, how old was the writing on it by June 1985? According to Noreen, shortly after the disappearance of Eugene Martin, she and several others in Des Moines were anonymously mailed a rather curious modified version of the kidnapped John David Gosch poster. Below the sketch of the man from the blue Ford Fairmont was another sketch that perfectly resembled Sam Soda. And perhaps to illustrate that point, a newspaper photograph of Soda was included right next to the sketch. An arrow was drawn from the sketch of Soda to the sketch of the man in the Ford Fairmont. With the exact date that the poster was while the exact date that the poster was mailed is unknown because it incorporated a photo of Sam Soda from a Des Moines Register article on October 10th, 1984. The poster must have been sent in late 85 at the earliest. It is interesting to note that the Sam Soda composite sketch was not drawn from scratch, but rather modified from the sketch of the man in the blue car, as the hairline, ears, nose, and facial structure are identical. Thus, the poster appears to have been suggesting that Sam Soda was the man in the car seen on the morning of Johnny's abduction. I mean, is anybody having trouble keeping up with the amount of coincidences here? As Noreen would later recount in 1988, the local man who called in June 1984 offering to help on the case, Sam Soda, soon attracted suspicion from the Gosch family because of how much he knew about the pedophile underworld in Des Moines. His foreknowledge of Martin's disappearance and his exposure of a previously unknown pedophile at the Des Moines Register confirmed that. Noreen claims that police began monitoring the man, which in turn led the Gosches to start receiving harassment and threats at home. Are they saying that Sam Soda was the guy threatening them? Okay. Following the Tulsa incident, the Gosch family feared for their safety. So Noreen held a press conference saying they knew who kidnapped Johnny. At the press conference, Noreen referred to 3 men from Des Moines along with a pedophile contact in Houston. She asserted that the police also knew the identities of the men and were doing everything within their legal boundaries to arrest them, a statement to which police gave no comment. Noreen acknowledged that her announcement might cause the kidnappers to flee, but pointed out that that would be revealing too, wouldn't it? Following the press conference, said Noreen, the local man being watched by police, Sam Soda, left town and the harassment against the family stopped. Not long afterwards, the man returned to Des Moines. It is unclear whether the perpetrators she named were actual suspects or if the announcement was some kind of bluff to put a pressure on the real person of interest, Soda. On Valentine's Day in 1988, a typed letter by someone claiming to be Johnny arrived at the Gosch home postmarked from Idaho. The author said that the captors dyed his hair, changed his looks, and that he was forced to do things that disgusted him. He asked that the Gosches for their continued love and forgiveness, even though he would not be allowed to return home. The letter was signed, your son Johnny Gosch, a very distinctive way that Johnny used to sign notes. According to Noreen, the letter was further validated by its reference to the 1983 incident with Johnny in Oklahoma, which was publicized but never had the city revealed. Bonacci comes forward. By September 1990, the Gosch family stated that their investigation had wound down. Nevertheless, they held firm to their belief that Johnny was taken out of the area in a well-organized kidnapping and resolved to continue working on their case. It was around that time they had received a major lead from John DeCamp, the lawyer for the Franklin child sex ring victim Paul Bonacci. As DeCamp recounted, it was reading a transcript of Bonacci's interview with a psychiatrist and noticed that Bonacci mentioned an incident involving a newspaper carrier in Iowa. DeCamp was struck by its similarity to the Gosch case and went to the library to verify the details, confirming that the date stated by Bonacci matched the date of Johnny's abduction. He contacted the Gosch family in late 1990 to inform them he had a client who confessed to helping abduct Johnny Gosch. The call was taken by John Gosch Sr., who did not tell Noreen about the new information. Though initially skeptical, Leonard Gosch ultimately did come down to the prison to meet Bonacci. DeCamp recalled that John came to Nebraska a couple weeks after their initial contact and walked into the Lincoln Correctional Center to meet with Bonacci. He asked Bonacci, "Do you know who I am?" And Bonacci responded, "You look like, it can't be the eyes, you look like Johnny Gosch." John came away from the meeting believing that Bonacci was sincere and telling the truth. Around the time John met with Bonacci in prison, he hired Omaha private detective Roy Stevens to check out Bonacci's story. Stevens spent hundreds of hours interviewing Bonacci and tracking down leads in Nebraska, Iowa, Minnesota, and Colorado that Bonacci provided. Bonacci described to Stevens how a man named Emilio, who made his living abducting and selling children, brought him to Des Moines to help abduct Johnny Gosch. Emilio was the driver of the blue car who stopped to ask Johnny for directions, and Bonacci was in the back of the car, given the task of holding Johnny down after he was shoved into the car. Two other people were also implicated by Bonacci in the kidnapping, one of whom who was a local contact in Des Moines. The night before, they stayed at a hotel in Des Moines. Going from a skeptic of Bonacci's to a believer in his account, Stevens insisted that Bonacci hasn't told me anything that hasn't been true. I wonder how much investigation was done. So at the hotel, did they give fake names? They weren't able to track these guys from the hotel? Or they paid cash, whatever? Noreen Gosch did not learn about Bonacci until March 91, although accounts differ on whether it was her husband or Roy Stevens who first informed her. The account in which her husband was the one to inform her contains what is likely a false explanation of why Noreen was not in the loop regarding Bonacci from the beginning, giving more credibility to the account in Noreen's book that it was Stevens who first called her about Bonacci's confession and visited Des Moines to show her tapes of Bonacci interviews. To test Bonacci's veracity, the Gosches gave Stevens a photo for Bonacci to identify of a Des Moines man whom they had already suspected of being involved in the abduction. Stevens only received a photo, not a name or any other identifying information. When Stevens placed it in a lineup of a dozen photos, Bonacci picked out the Des Moines man, said the man's name, and identified him as the local contact who came to the motel the night before with a photo of Johnny, informing the kidnappers that he was the kid they were going to take. As Noreen told the Des Moines Register, this contact in Des Moines had been under suspicion by the family for some time. The Des Moines man was not identified in news reports at the time, but the Gosches said that Bonacci provided good information on him and identified his photograph and stated that PIs were gathering information on him almost daily. His first name of Sam would eventually be publicized, and in 2000, Noreen explicitly revealed that the man picked out of the lineup was Sam Soda. It can be seen above that even as far back as 1986, Soda was suspected by the Gosch family. At the end of June 1991, it was made public that Roy Stevens was investigating good information that had recently surfaced in Johnny's case. No specifics were revealed until a month later when news stories began to break about Bonacci's confession to helping abduct Johnny Gosch. In October 91, Bonacci gave his first detailed public account of the Johnny Gosch abduction. He claimed to have met the ringleader Emilio as a young boy living in Carter Lake, Iowa. The day before the abduction, Emilio took him from Omaha to a hotel in Des Moines where they met men named Sam and Tony. Bonacci described Sam as white, medium height, and heavy, and Tony as tall blonde with a bad complexion. In the motel room the night before the abduction, Sam was showing Emilio photographs of various paperboys, telling him how much money he could make off of them. One photo, that of Johnny Gosch, was separated from the stack. Early the next morning, all of them went out to abduct Johnny. Bonacci rode in the back of the car driven by Emilio. At a certain point, the car stopped and a boy was shoved in. Following the orders of Emilio, Bonacci held the boy down and chloroformed him. All of the kidnappers drove off, with Johnny's body being transferred between the other two vehicles driven by Sam and Tony. They stopped in Council Bluffs, Iowa to get a drink, then brought Johnny to a farmhouse near Sioux City, owned by a man named Charlie. Johnny was scared and crying and asked Bonacci what was going to happen to him. For at least a week, Johnny was kept in a locked, windowless room at the farmhouse. Subsequently, Johnny ended up being held captive in Colorado, where Bonacci saw him again in March 1986. Paul Bonacci's account of meeting Johnny Gosch predated the visit from John Gosch Sr. In October 1990, while Bonacci was in prison, he had been since '89, CARICOR investigator Robert Hansel met with Alicia Owens' mother to discuss the contents of Bonacci's diary. One passage referred to an incident in September '82 in which Emilio took Bonacci to a farmhouse in Iowa where two boys were being held captive. The older of the two boys was named Johnny, came from Des Moines, was about 13 years old, had blue eyes, brown hair, and wore a Kim's Academy shirt with black athletic pants. All of these characteristics noted down in Bonacci's diary, including the clothing, match up with Johnny Gosch at the time of his abduction. Not only would Bonacci not have access to these diaries while in prison, but forensic analysis verified that Bonacci's diaries were written contemporaneously with the events they referred to. Robert Hansel confirmed that Johnny Gosch had surfaced in the Franklin investigation no later than July 1990, and from other kids besides Bonacci. Throughout the past decade, many had tried to deceive the Gosch family into thinking they had information on Johnny. Unlike these hoaxers, Bonacci not only knew multiple obscure, like tongue and leg scars, and undisclosed, a stutter when stressed and being taken by Noreen to her yoga classes, personal characteristics of Johnny Gosch, but possessed substantial information about the abduction logistics, which had never been revealed to the public. Photos taken of Johnny before the abduction. The Gosch's PI turned up a witness in the neighborhood who saw Johnny being photographed by a stranger a couple weeks before his kidnapping. This discovery was never publicized. In Paul Bonacci's account of the abduction, he described how Sam brought a photograph of Johnny and told the kidnappers that he was the boy they would abduct, matching this then unrevealed information that Johnny had been photographed by a third party in advance of his kidnapping. Beyond just knowing the existence of pre-abduction photography, Bonacci's description of the photograph shown by Sam matched the location where in the neighborhood Johnny was, and circumstances, Johnny carrying his paper bag, of the photos as described by the neighbor. How the abduction took place. As discussed above, Bonacci identified Sam Soto's photograph from a lineup and named his as Sam. The fact that he could identify a Des Moines man whom the Gosches had already come to suspect in their own investigation confirms Bonacci's knowledge of the circumstances behind the abduction. Moreover, Bonacci accurately described the multiple vehicles that were involved in the abduction. As explained below, press reports consistently claimed that there were different vehicles on Ashworth and Marquardt, even though the Gosches had concluded that the same car simply drove around the block. Bonacci only described one blue car that approached Johnny and then drove around the block to abduct him, contradicting most public reports but matching what private investigators had found. Aside from the car publicly mentioned by police, the Gosch's private investigators also discovered a van that had been in the neighborhood, and Bonacci knew about it. Noreen described how one of her investigators spoke to a man who noticed something very strange on the morning of the abduction. A van was sitting parked on the street with its motor running. After some time, a car drove up. The passengers of that car transferred a large object with a blanket into their van. Then both vehicles left. What? That's crazy. Bonacci independently matched these unpublicized details in his own account of the abduction, mentioning a van driven by Tony that they transferred Johnny's body into. He also described there being a station wagon near the scene of the abduction that was driven by Sam. According to Noreen, the Iowa DMV confirmed to her that Sam Soda did own a vehicle matching Bonacci's description. Wow. I mean, how many people's heads are spinning now? Because I know a lot of people just totally and outright dismiss Bonacci. But like he just keeps nailing all these details. Like it's how can you just discount this? It's crazy. Johnny Gosch was here at a Denver restaurant. Bonacci's story to Roy Stevens, given in late 1990 and early 1991, involved Johnny being taken to Colorado. At the time, there was no reason for anyone to think Johnny had been in Colorado. Then, in the summer of 1991, family friends of the Gosches who were at a Mexican restaurant in Denver noticed Johnny Gosch was here written on the bathroom wall. This was a remarkable after-the-fact validation of Bonacci's claims regarding Johnny's whereabouts. After this sighting made its way back to the Gosch family, Roy Stevens went to check out the lead. He took several photos of the restaurant, including its exterior and the bathroom wall. When Bonacci was shown a picture of nothing but the restaurant from the outside, he accurately described the distinctive interior and recounted how he, Johnny, and another boy were painting their nails, then went into the bathroom and wrote on the wall using their red nail polish. Indeed, the message turned out to have been written with red nail polish, validating Bonacci's scenario of being with Johnny. I mean, that's definitely a specific thing to write with. Most people would say marker or whatever, pen. I mean, nail polish, wow. Bonacci had also received many letters during his incarceration which referred to J.G. or Johnny, Emilio, and the COL. These were, according to Bonacci, sent to him by former victims of the Franklin Ring. One letter, postmarked June 1990 from Sacramento, referred to J.G. getting face surgery and going back to blonde, and that stated the colonel is gone to Mexico and took J.G. with him. And again, is it just coincidentally that there's this other John Gosch who died in Mexico, whose body turns up in Mexico? Another letter alluded to the other missing boys from Des Moines, like Eugene Martin, stating that J.G. was not the only boy we got from D.M. Following his revelation of it to Roy Stevens, Bonacci showed Stevens a letter discussing the 1986 graffiti at the Mexican restaurant in Denver, which included the excerpt, "I remember the restaurant in Colorado. We painted our nails, and I wrote on the wall with J.G." All right, so we're going to go even further into MindShock land now here. I mean, you cannot make this stuff up. I mean, I don't know how people just discredit all of this, but the coincidence stacks are so high. So, the first America's Most Wanted episode on the case airs November 92. Jimmy Gibson comes forward in early 1993. He meets with Noreen. He stays in various places such as Nebraska with DeCamp and Reverend Morrow, the Gosch hobby farm outside of Woodward, Iowa, and perhaps Mary Schmidt's Hotel in Deadwood, South Dakota. Subsequent episodes of America's Most Wanted air, which interview Jimmy and visit the house in Colorado. The Charlie Kerr farm surveillance is ruined by Leonard John Gosch, divorced not long after, hobby farm in Dallas County, Iowa. Okay, so what is this all about? So Charlie Kerr is this supposed Chuck, Charlie, whatever. This is where some believe Johnny and others were taken immediately after the abduction. So Leonard John Gosch, Johnny Gosch's own father, is alleged to have warned Charlie Kerr that he was going to be arrested. And this is what caused basically the incident that caused the divorce. Now, this is just completely mind shock. But I'm going to go in order here on the Cav Def right up. So we'll get to that in a moment. So, controversies, other missing kids. It is suspected, but not confirmed, that the 1984 disappearance of Eugene Martin and the 1986 disappearance of Mark Allen are both connected to the same pedophile ring said to have abducted Johnny. All three boys were from Des Moines and about 13 years old at the time of the disappearances, and roughly 2 years passed between each boy going missing, potentially implying some kind of pattern. Johnny and Eugene were particularly alike as they were both paper boys for the Des Moines Register. Another boy in the Midwest commonly linked to Johnny's abduction is Jacob Wetterling, who was kidnapped in Minnesota in 1989. Jacob's involvement in the Franklin pedophile ring is highly disputed. In 2016, local pedophile Danny Heinrich confessed to abducting and murdering Jacob and led them to his body, which was the same age as when he was abducted. Some local investigators, however, maintain that the body found was not really Jacob at all. What? I haven't seen that. They point to anomalies such as animal bones initially being found at the burial site amongst Jacob's clothing, and how police announced they would DNA test Jacob's alleged remains but do not appear to have released any results. I wonder what the date of this is. I'm gonna double check this in a moment. Former New York Police Department officer Jim Rothstein, who did investigative work for Noreen, is one such person who believes the Wetterling case is still unresolved. Prior to Heinrich's confession, Noreen divulged in her book that Bonacci got a letter from another Franklin victim identifying Emilio and Charlie Kerr as participants in Jacob's abduction. She also claimed in a 2013 Franklin Files post, likely citing Rothstein, who said the same in a 2018 interview, that Sam Soda was in St. Cloud, Minnesota immediately before the kidnapping. In the same interview, Rothstein claimed that Soda's presence in St. Cloud was under the cover of working for the Rowan Trucking Company, a non-publicized piece of information that Soda himself would later corroborate in an interview with the Faded Out podcast. Michaela Garrecht, a 9-year-old girl abducted from the San Fran area in 1988, was long suspected to be another victim of Tony. The description that Bonacci gave of Tony was remarkably similar to the description of Michaela's kidnapper, and when Roy Stevens showed Bonacci sketches from several child abductions that resembled his Tony description, Bonacci adamantly identified the sketch from Michaela's case. In December 2020, David Misch was arrested for Michaela's kidnapping and murder based on an alleged identification of a handprint on Michaela's scooter that the kidnapper had moved near his car to lure her over. That case is currently in progress, and it remains to be seen whether the evidence holds up in court, although Misch's involvement does not negate the pre-existing evidence of a larger plot behind her kidnapping. Back in 1989, U.S. Customs agents found indications that Michaela Garrecht and Amber Swartz Garcia, another Bay Area kidnapping victim from earlier in 1988, were trafficked by pedophile Richard Hellwig. 2 child victims of Hellwig in Mexico identified Michaela and Amber as having been with Hellwig, and the mother of those victims said, but later recanted, that Hellwig gave her earrings identical to the ones worn by Michaela. Hellwig had been busted across the border near San Diego with child pornography information on ages of consent in various countries, copies of the NAMBLA bulletin, and other pedophilia-related items. His San Francisco address was the same as the address for the NAMBLA chapter in that city. NAMBLA itself has been linked to the Franklin pedophile ring, with Alicia Owens' lawyer reportedly finding evidence of a $5 million account for NAMBLA at the Franklin Credit Union. Okay, wow. That's a lot to unpack there. An interesting point here on Mark Allen, which is also suspicious. This is a post on charlieross.wordpress.com, November 27, 2010. A lot of people know that 2 boys named Johnny Gosch, age 12, and Eugene Martin, age 13, disappeared from Des Moines, Iowa in the 80s and were never found. But there was a 3rd boy, 13-year-old Mark James Warren Allen, who also vanished mysteriously from Des Moines during that time period. And for whatever reason, he never gets any media attention. The police refused to investigate for 2 days. You'd think that from the previous 2 disappearances, they would have learned that time is of the essence, but no. So Mark Allen went missing March 29th, 1986, the day before Easter. Again, I mean, with these holidays, some of these Satanists, man. 13-year-old Mark James Warren Allen told his mother he planned to walk to a friend's house down the street but never arrived at the neighbor's home, and he hasn't been seen since. Based on previous media reports, Allen initially was thought to be the third Iowa paperboy to vanish without a trace during the 80s. Johnny Gosch, 12, of West Des Moines, disappeared September 5th, 1982. 13-year-old Eugene Martin vanishes from Des Moines' south side just 2 years later, 84, under very similar circumstances. An in-depth Des Moines Register article on Iowa's missing persons published August 18th, 2013 confirmed Allen was not a paperboy. Teen was handful, shifted back and forth. Mark's mother, Nancy Allen, admitted her son had been a handful. The teen had been shifted back and forth between her Iowa residence and his father's Minnesota home most of his young life, and he'd often get into trouble. But in late November 2010, a week normally filled with family get-togethers, shopping, and holiday activities, Nancy took time to speak with WHO TV Channel 13's Aaron Brillbeck about what it's like waiting so many years for answers and wondering about the fate of a young son who never quite seemed to fit in. It was hard because he had been living with his dad for a while, then came back and lived with me, Nancy said. November 25th, 2010. His younger brother and older sister were real close, and he wanted to be in there in tight. They never got a chance for that to happen. The night before Easter 86, the teen left his Southwest Emma Avenue home to hang out with friends and perhaps take in a movie just as his siblings prepared for a pizza dinner. He walked out the door and the kids were getting ready to have pizza, and I'll never forget it as long as I live. Allen told Brillbeck, the last thing he said to me as he walked out the door was, "Save me some pizza, Mom. I'll be hungry when I get home." Nancy watched her son walk down the sidewalk past the bushes, and then he was gone. He waved when he got to the bushes, and I waved at him, and that was that, and I never saw him again, his mother said. The next morning, when Nancy realized Mark hadn't come home the night before, she knew immediately something wasn't right, but hoped against hope he'd prove her wrong. It was Easter Sunday, so I thought maybe he went to Grandma's, knowing Grandma would have an Easter basket there for each of the kids. So I asked my mom, but he wasn't there, she said. I had phone numbers for his friends, called all of them. No one had seen him. Allen said she called police, but they told her they couldn't do anything for 48 hours. Days turned into months. Police checked in Minnesota, where Mark's father lived, and in Connecticut, where the boy's paternal grandmother lived. Nothing. Allen told Brillbeck she didn't know whether her son's disappearance was linked to the disappearances of Johnny Gosch and Eugene Martin, but said police seemed reluctant to help her because of the other missing teens. Wait, what? Because other missing people are because there's other missing people, they're not going to help her? What the heck is this? I just feel like at this time they were just afraid of what would happen with the Eugene Martin and Gosch thing. I got the distinct feeling that they did not want parents to be frightened to let their children sell newspapers or do different things, she said. What? So they intentionally downplayed his case in the media, which seemed to have worked because the Mark Allen case is the least publicized. I mean, in most of these write-ups I'm reading on Gosch, they only mention Eugene Martin as the other missing. I mean, maybe because he was also a paperboy, but still, I mean, this is still relevant if there's a 2-year pattern here. The Des Moines Police Department Sergeant Jeff Edwards disagrees. I know detectives followed up on leads that did not pan out, Edwards told Brillbeck in a separate interview, aired Thanksgiving Day 2010. They were not able to locate him. He's still listed as a missing person. No kidding. Mark's mother said she doesn't know whether her son is dead or alive, but after 25 years, she'd like to know for sure, so she and her son can find peace. There are times when the news says they found a body and they're not sure how old it is, but they're pretty sure it's male, said Nancy. And in one instant, you hold your breath and bite your fingernails and hope that it's not your child. And in other ways, you wish they would come out and say that it is your child, so you can finally bury them and go to rest. Mark Allen was last seen wearing a light blue t-shirt, blue jean shorts, white socks, gray tennis shoes with Velcro tabs. He has a small scar on the top of his head, and his first name might be spelled Mark with a K by some agencies. involving missing children and persons. To date, there is no definitive evidence connecting Mark Allen's case to that of Johnny Gosch or Eugene Martin. So apparently a DNA sample was only submitted. Oh, a DNA sample was submitted. Okay. Regarding Jacob Wetterling, I actually can't find a definitive link. Just reports that it's him, but I can't find any official statements about the results of the DNA on the remains. Now, I guess I'm going to have to do a podcast on the Wetterling case because apparently... Actually, there's... CBS News stated in September 3rd, 2016 that a forensic odontologist identified the remains as Wetterling's. So this is dental or from his teeth? I mean, again, if this was some kind of cover-up, obviously they could have done that. It would be nice to have multiple independent verifications here and DNA on the bone fragments, not just the teeth. Because supposedly they were testing the remains, so I don't know. This is really bizarre. Also, supposedly his DNA was found on other kidnapped victims. So, again, this is not a Wetterling podcast. I'm not going to go too far down that. So, depending on how quickly he would have been killed. Also, yeah, the timeline's weird. So supposedly they confirmed it was him before the results. I don't know. This is weird. So, let's continue on here, back to CavDef. Father's involvement. Since the late 90s, there have been suggestions that Johnny's father, Leonard John Gosch, was complicit in his son's kidnapping. No definitive evidence of his involvement has ever surfaced. All the while, Noreen Gosch and others have alleged many instances of suspicious behavior on Leonard's part, and he is known to be deceptive about key facts of the case. One question that has never been answered is why Johnny, on the one day he got abducted, did the paper route by himself instead of being accompanied by his father as usual. As Noreen stated in 1988 and in her 2000 book, Leonard always went with Johnny on Sunday mornings, and Leonard himself said this in the film Who Took Johnny, that, quote, I was with him every Sunday morning except that particular Sunday morning that he was kidnapped, end quote. Going out that morning without Leonard left Johnny far more open to being abducted. Indeed, it is unlikely that an abduction would have succeeded in Leonard's presence. That Johnny broke this pattern for the first time on September 5th, 1982, and happened to be abducted the same day is incredible enough to raise suspicion that him being alone that morning was planned. I'm still kind of reeling from the woman taking his photograph from weeks before. I mean, I can't get over that. I mean, that's so creepy. That's so creepy. And then, yeah, people, when you combine it with the phone calls and all these statements Leonard supposedly made, Noreen goes over them in the book, like last chance to go fishing that summer. I mean, with Johnny, there were certain statements that Leonard had made. Supposedly he was very agitated, and then all those phone calls. Some alleged he was being blackmailed in some capacity. Noreen also said Leonard threatened his own suicide from pressure or whatever. So, yeah, I mean, it's definitely weird. Let's continue on here. At first glance, since it was up to Johnny to wake his father, not the other way around, this suspicion does not reflect on Leonard. Noreen stated as far back as 1988 that on the night before the kidnapping, Johnny asked to do the route alone, and she and her husband refused. But he disobeyed to deliver papers by himself that morning. But Noreen claimed in her book that when Johnny asked to do the route on his own, Leonard initially said yes, before Noreen overruled him. Furthermore, even though Noreen refused his request, Johnny came back downstairs shortly after going to bed to hug his mother again and tell her, "You are the best." Based on that, there are indications that Leonard went behind Noreen's back to ensure that Johnny would go out unaccompanied that next morning. I mean, how would anybody know if Leonard did? Yeah, if he did go to Johnny later and say, yeah, you could actually go by yourself. How would anybody other than them know? This was far from the only irregular occurrence involving Leonard that Noreen alleged in her book. According to her, Leonard began acting very erratically a few months prior to Johnny's abduction, and his behavior only worsened afterwards. While many of her accusations about Leonard have not been corroborated, some of them have, and his inconsistent false statements about the case, see below, illustrate a general lack of credibility on his part. Early in 1982, Leonard allegedly developed a very hateful attitude, which he took out on all of Noreen's kids, but especially her older son, Joe Gosch. In June 82, he purportedly arranged a fishing trip with Joe and Johnny to Lake of the Ozarks because it might be their, quote, last or only opportunity to do so, end quote. And when they got back, Noreen's son told her that Leonard was very evidently depressed. The next month, while Leonard was on a business trip in Raleigh, North Carolina, he allegedly called Noreen threatening to kill himself because he could no longer live with it. And she had to make the Raleigh police do a welfare check. It can be surmised from Noreen's account that something happened in 1982 that put Leonard under a substantial amount of stress. So this is August 82, before the abduction, or even earlier than, no, July. This is July's business trip. Okay, then in August 82, Noreen claims that Leonard took Johnny on a day trip to Omaha, with one of their destinations being Offutt Air Force Base. Johnny was said to have had a foggy memory of the trip. Per Noreen's account, immediately after the Omaha trip, she and Leonard began receiving those hang-up phone calls every Sunday morning, 1 a.m. They continued until the day of Johnny's abduction, when Leonard answered not with wrong number as he usually did, but instead gave the caller a series of affirmative responses. After Johnny was kidnapped, the calls stopped. These calls have only received limited corroboration, but if true, they raise the questions about what Leonard was up to in the weeks just before Johnny's abduction. Oh, I do not like this Omaha trip. Johnny couldn't recall what happened. Then there's also a CIA asset calling Noreen afterwards to try to be involved in the case. So just a few weeks he's at Air Force Base. Did the woman taking his pictures, was that after their visit to the Air Force Base? What kind of personnel at the Air Force Base might have seen Johnny? I mean, this is kind of weird. This is really weird. After Johnny was kidnapped, Noreen was forced to shoulder most of the responsibility for keeping the case alive, as Leonard was less inclined to go out in the public eye. Behind the scenes, meanwhile, the marriage was in serious turmoil, according to Noreen. Leonard began spending most of his time on purported business trips, not informing Noreen of his plans, whereabouts, or contact information while he was gone. Much of his time away was spent in Lincoln, Nebraska, and Omaha, Nebraska. There's Omaha again. They did still make public appearances together on the case, but some of them turned disastrous. Following an event near Davenport, Iowa, August 17, 1984, they were invited to, Leonard severely beat Noreen, an accusation corroborated by Scott County Sheriff's Deputy Sam Raley. Wow. After Franklin scandal victim Paul Bonacci confessed his involvement in Johnny's abduction, his attorney, John DeCamp, informed the Gosch family, but Noreen has accused Leonard of hiding this information from her. It was acknowledged even back in 1992 that Leonard checked out Bonacci on his own for several months before Noreen found out, and Leonard confirmed in 2018 interviews that he visited Bonacci in prison with John DeCamp and private investigator Roy Stevens, but not his wife. The question is whether Leonard's intent was to inform Noreen about Bonacci eventually, or keep the information hidden from her indefinitely. While the 92 article claims that it was Leonard who ultimately informed her about Bonacci, there are doubts about how accurately it describes Noreen and Leonard's motivations. It claims that Leonard checked out Bonacci during a period of 6 or 7 months from late 1990 to March 91 when Noreen had completely shut down on the case. But there are newspaper quotes of her during that period which contradict that. It is therefore unexplained why Leonard spent a long period of time investigating Bonacci without telling Noreen, especially if he didn't seem that interested in any other aspect of the investigation. Is it because he knew Bonacci had real credible info? Per Noreen's later account in her book, she was actually informed not by her husband, but by Roy Stevens. In 1999 court testimony and her book, Noreen claimed that Leonard, in fact, went to great lengths to hide Bonacci from her, visiting key people from the Franklin investigation with a woman other than Noreen, who he introduced as his wife. Okay, all right. We're kind of going past the point of no return with Leonard here. I mean, this is not looking good. Noreen's book has a picture of this alleged Noreen impersonator standing beside Leonard, and the woman is exactly who Noreen claims, a Nebraska private eye who used to work with Roy Stevens. Yet the woman in question denies ever playing the role of a Noreen imposter and insists the image is faked. There is no definitive proof either way at the moment. If, however, the image is authentic, then it is clear that Leonard did have someone impersonate his wife, which certainly indicates an intent to deceive Noreen. See, this is kind of weird, though, because if this is just a woman who works with Roy Stevens and unbeknownst to her, Leonard just introduced her as his wife and she didn't, whatever, it was an awkward moment and she didn't jump in to clarify, etc. But why would she claim the image is faked? I mean, that's a bridge too far there. And now can Roy Stevens be trusted? But then again, he uncovered so much of this. Why wouldn't he be? I mean, I don't know. A lot of this does not make any sense. The final alleged incident between Noreen and Leonard had to do with the investigation of Charlie Kerr, on whose Iowa farmhouse Johnny was said to be held for a brief period of time following his abduction. Bonacci only knew Kerr by his first name Charlie, but according to Noreen, he was able to draw a picture which Roy Stevens matched to Kerr with the help of Sioux City authorities. Kerr was described by Noreen as having a lengthy rap sheet for sexual offenses against children. The county attorney in Sioux City then purportedly arranged for a months-long surveillance operation on Kerr. One day in 1993, the county attorney informed Noreen that they were about to arrest Charlie Kerr, and she told her husband, believing she could trust him. Later that day, Noreen got an angry call from the county attorney saying that Leonard had driven up to Kerr's trailer and gone inside to speak with him, which resulted in Kerr fleeing the area before they could arrest him. According to Noreen, for whatever reason, Leonard went to tip off Charlie Kerr about the impending arrest. This incident has not been definitively proven, but Jimmy Gibson corroborated the story, and certain details check out. Noreen described Kerr as having a record of pedophilia and living in a trailer, both of which are proven true by a Sioux City police report. It appears that the arrest of one of the perpetrators in Johnny's abduction was sabotaged by Johnny's own father, which is highly suspicious. Noreen and Leonard divorced very shortly after September 1993. Wow. Okay. I mean, the plot has thickened so much here. I mean, I really don't know what to make of this. Is that not true, though? Like, how can it be verified? I mean, obviously this chart, okay, is there evidence that there was an impending arrest? Is there evidence that Leonard went to tip off Kerr? I mean, there's definitely, the father is just highly suspect given all of these other issues here. I mean, this is just highly suspect. I mean, and how heartbreaking that, again, this is MINDSHOCK. I'm not alleging anything is true or untrue. But if this theory is true, again, I'm not stating it is, but if it is, how heartbreaking is that for Johnny? Set up by his own father to get a kid. I mean, this is, and again, something's not right, I'm going home. I mean, his statement from the other witness, I mean, that's just creepy on so many levels. That, like, there are these weird people driving around talking to him, and he's just going home. I mean, it's just, yeah, this is one rough case. Following the divorce between him and Noreen, Leonard disappeared from public view. Aside from a statement to the Des Moines Register in 1999, denouncing Noreen's claim that Johnny had visited her. And also for Noreen, how does your heart not break for Noreen? She has to go through all this, and also the possibility that your own husband, the father of your missing son, might have been responsible and involved. He then reemerged on 2011 to give his own side of the story, vanished with Beth Holloway in 2011 to the company rumor behind Who Took Johnny in 2012, and most recently to Sarah DeMeo, who ran the Faded Out podcast in 2018. Leonard insisted that Noreen and Paul Bonacci's versions of events was untrue. However, numerous statements that he made were at odds with the established record and even his own prior statements. Flip-flop on Paul Bonacci. Leonard told Sarah that he knew Paul Bonacci was lying from the very first meeting. He claimed that he asked Bonacci how tall Johnny was, and Bonacci responded that Johnny was 5'2", even though Johnny was a big kid for his age at 5'7". Then, according to Leonard, he spoke to a prison guard who informed him that Bonacci's cell was full of newspapers about the Gosch case, proof that Bonacci was studying the details of the case to insert himself into the story. But then how did he not memorize the height? No corroboration exists for Leonard's account to Fade It Out, and much of it is explicitly contradicted. In Bonacci's diary, he estimated Johnny's height to be 5'5", which is very close to accurate. Furthermore, what Leonard told Sarah about Bonacci immediately exposing himself as a con man contradicts his own statements from 1991 and 1992. Most egregiously, in April 92, he held a press conference at John DeCamp's office endorsing the Franklin cover-up, which lauds Bonacci as a credible witness in the Gosch case, and said, "Paul told my wife and I things we've never told anybody." On Inside Edition, Leonard called law enforcement's refusal to interview Bonacci a major cover-up and pushed back against law enforcement accusations that Bonacci was a pathological liar. It is also weird, though, like, if he was responsible, was he just going along to get along and then he flip-flops later? I mean, there's a lot that doesn't make sense here. Lie about going home immediately upon finding Johnny's wagon. In recounting the morning of September 5th, 82, Leonard said on Fade It Out that as soon as he found Johnny's wagon abandoned, he knew something was wrong and quickly headed home to have Noreen call the police. This has been a fairly consistent part of Leonard's story, also being told by him in America's MIA Children 1992 and Who Took Johnny 2014. Yet, a September 6, 1982 news article says that after neighbors called the Gosches at 7:45 a.m. asking where their Sunday papers were, Leonard went out and found the wagon, realized Johnny was missing, but delivered all of Johnny's papers before calling the police at 8:30 a.m. That's super weird. The 8:30 a.m. time is corroborated by the police report, and also indicates that Leonard's account of coming home immediately upon finding the wagon is false unless the neighbors called after 8 a.m., far later than has ever been claimed. Claim that sometimes Johnny went alone on Sunday mornings. Leonard stated during his Fade It Out interviews that he did not accompany Johnny on his paper route every Sunday morning, just the vast majority of them. As detailed above, both Noreen, as far back as 1988, before any conceivable motive to make Leonard look bad after the divorce, and Leonard himself contradict that, stating that Leonard always accompanied Johnny except on the day Johnny was abducted. Disavowing the proofs of life for Johnny. When asked about it by Sarah, Leonard responded that he never believed any of the occurrences supposedly indicating Johnny was still alive, sightings, dollar bills, etc., were actually Johnny. Yet in the 80s, Leonard clearly viewed these proof of life as authentic. He was right alongside Noreen at an 85 press conference where they both announced the I Am Alive dollar bill, including the verification of Johnny's handwriting. At the press conference, Leonard called the dollar bill a source of additional hope that Johnny was alive. In the 84 documentary, Kidnapped by a Stranger, when asked about the evidence that Johnny was still alive, Leonard cited phone calls made to Noreen, as well as the Oklahoma sighting, which he explained in great detail. The origin of the Emilio sketch and name. Leonard made two strange claims about the kidnapper more commonly known as Emilio. The widely distributed sketch came not from the Gosches, but from the police. And the name Emilio originated not from Paul Bonacci, but from the Gosches' private investigator, Dennis Whalen. An old Des Moines Register article shows that the Gosch family held a press conference in November 1982 where they unveiled two sketches of the kidnapper they had commissioned, which are the same sketches still in use today. Police insisted that their sketch was similar to the Gosches, but the police sketch was not released. Why would it not be released? Leonard was also even quoted in the article as criticizing the sketch made to police, claiming that the witnesses considered it very inaccurate. As for the origin of the name Emilio, no evidence exists that anyone used the name prior to Bonacci, and Leonard did not explain how Bonacci would have come across a name used by their private investigator. If Whalen and Bonacci did use the same name, it was almost certainly independently, which only strengthens Bonacci's credibility. Curiously, Bonacci described Emilio as selling children at auctions, and Whalen was known to have attended one such child auction while searching for Johnny. The Sam Soda rehabilitation. Despite Sam Soda having been a person of interest for the Gosches since very early on in the investigation, all that Leonard recounted about Sam on Faded Out was that he did some investigative work on the case and had mafia connections. Well, with a name like that. It cannot be credibly asserted that Leonard was unaware of Sam being a prime suspect in the abduction, because he co-authored an opinion piece with Noreen which called the local man in Des Moines named Sam a longtime suspect who Paul Bonacci had accurately identified. This attempted rehabilitation of Sam Soda's image is part of a larger issue. The multitude of inconsistent statements by Leonard demonstrates a severe lack of credibility on his part. Leonard's motives for repeatedly misrepresenting the facts of the case are unknown. The apparent intention, however, is to rewrite history in a very self-serving manner. All of Leonard's inconsistencies revise the facts of the case in a particular direction, erasing details that might portray him in a suspicious light, i.e. Johnny having never done the route before, him delaying the call to police, attacking claims by Noreen, the proofs of life, Sam Soda's guilt, and attacking evidence of the Franklin connection, Paul Bonacci accurately describing Johnny Emilio origin.